The sun hanging over Kepler Station was a pale, sickly thing, a dying star that barely warmed the colony anymore. Marcus Chin stood at the edge of the lower settlement, watching the dust storms roll across the rust-colored plains below. The colony had been built 300 years ago with hope and ambition. Now it was a graveyard of broken dreams. He was 38 years old, though his calloused hands and weathered face made him look closer to 50. Marcus had spent his entire life in this forgotten corner of the galaxy, born to a mother who arrived on the last supply ship before the aliens came. He had never known freedom, only servitude. Above the settlement, the Veiled One's fortress hung like a wound in the sky. The massive structure, constructed from obsidian black metal, dominated the horizon. It was a constant reminder of occupation, of the crushing weight that pressed down on every human in the colony. The Veiled Ones, tall angular beings with skin that shimmered between purple and silver, had conquered Kepler Station 42 years ago. Most of the adults alive had never known a world without them. The colony's population had dwindled to barely 12,000 souls. They lived in designated zones, worked in the mines and factories, and received just enough food to keep them alive and productive. The aliens had no interest in genocide, they preferred exploitation. A dead human was worthless. A living one could be worked until the very marrow drained from their bones. That morning, Marcus had witnessed something that had shaken him to his core. The Veiled Ones had gathered the colony in the central square, a ritual they performed every few weeks to remind humanity of their place in the hierarchy. They had selected a young man named David, barely 20 years old, who had been caught stealing food. The punishment was public and brutal. David was placed in a containment field while the Veiled Ones slowly drained his life force, leaving behind nothing but a withered husk. It took 17 minutes. The colony watched in silence. No one cried. No one spoke. To show emotion was to invite similar punishment. Marcus had stood at the back of the crowd, his fists clenched so tightly that blood ran down his palms. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, now 16 years old. He wondered how long she had before the Veiled Ones decided she was expendable. He wondered if there was any point in continuing this half-life at all. That night he made a decision. He would go into the dead zone, the forbidden area where the old human settlements had been buried beneath sand and rock. It was forbidden because the Veiled Ones had declared it so, and forbidden areas often contained salvageable technology. Marcus was a salvage mechanic, one of the few jobs the aliens actually needed humans to do. The ancient human ships that had brought the colony here were too complex for the Veiled Ones to maintain, and they had learned that human hands could work miracles with broken machines. If he was careful, if he was lucky, maybe he could find something valuable enough to trade for better rations. Maybe he could buy his daughter a few more years of safety. Maybe. He gathered his tools, a scanner, a welding torch, a data cable older than he was, and checked the weather patterns. A storm was coming in 3 hours. That would provide cover. As Marcus made his way toward the dead zone, he did not know that his search for salvage would unearth something far greater than spare parts. He did not know that buried beneath the rust and sand was a relic of humanity's greatest achievement, a device that could reshape the fate of the colony forever. He knew only that he was desperate, and that desperation had a way of leading people toward their destiny. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky as Marcus disappeared into the wasteland. The ancient settlement of New Haven had been buried for a very long time. Marcus had read about it in the restricted archives he had access to through his work, a thriving human community that had existed before the Veiled Ones came. It had been destroyed during the initial invasion, erased from the map as a message. The Veiled Ones were efficient about eliminating symbols of human resistance. The sand had shifted dramatically over the decades. What had once been a thriving commercial district was now a dune landscape broken by the occasional jagged fragment of metal or composite material jutting from the earth. Marcus worked methodically, using his scanner to detect electromagnetic signatures beneath the surface. Most of what he found was worthless: burnt-out power cells, corroded circuit boards, broken tools that had no function anymore. But then, 40 meters below the surface of what had once been the central hub, his scanner detected something different. The signature was faint but distinct, a power source still active after 3 centuries. That alone was remarkable. Nothing human-made lasted that long without maintenance. Marcus began to dig, moving the sand carefully, revealing the corner of a structure that had been built into the bedrock itself. It took him 6 hours of careful excavation to uncover the entrance. By the time he finished, the storm was howling around him, sand whipping at his skin and embedding itself in his hair. His protective suit was barely holding. But he had found something, a sealed door with markings that made his breath catch. The symbols were human. English. And beneath the weathering and sand, he could make out words, Archive Station 7, Human Civilization Preservation Project. Marcus's hands shook as he approached the door. The power signature was coming from deeper inside. He pulled out his data cable and plugged it into the access port. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud against the howling wind, the door began to slide open. Inside was darkness and the smell of stale, recycled air. Marcus activated his torch and stepped inside. The interior had been preserved by the sealed environment, protected from the weathering of centuries. He could see equipment lining the walls, computers of a design he had never encountered before, and in the center of the chamber, on a raised platform, was an object that made him stop breathing. It was roughly spherical, about the size of his head, and it appeared to be made of a crystalline material that caught and refracted the light of his torch in impossible ways. The surface was covered with the same human markings he had seen outside, but there were other symbols too. Mathematical formulas, equations that seemed to extend across the entire surface of the sphere. Marcus approached it slowly as though it might shatter if he moved too quickly. As he drew closer, the sphere began to emit a faint humming sound. The light within it intensified, and for just a moment he could have sworn he saw images flowing across its surface. Images of vast ships moving through space, alien technology being dissected and understood, weapon systems being designed and refined. Then the humming stopped. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand and touched the sphere. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy ran through his body. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. Like his nervous system was being rewired, his mind expanded to accommodate new information. He gasped and pulled his hand back, stumbling away from the platform. For several minutes he just stood there, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had happened. The sphere continued to glow softly, as if waiting for something. Very carefully Marcus approached again. This time he did not touch it directly, but instead examined the platform it rested upon. There were grooves and channels carved into the surface, designed to connect with something. He studied his tools and realized that the data cable he carried might fit. He inserted the cable into one of the channels. Instantly, holographic displays flickered to life around him. Text began scrolling across the air, too fast to read. Then, slowly, the text began to reorganize itself into something his mind could comprehend. A video file. A message recorded centuries ago. A woman's face appeared before him, older, serious, with gray streaking her hair. She wore a uniform that Marcus did not recognize. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but there was something desperate beneath it. If you are seeing this, then the colony has survived long enough for someone to find this archive, she said. My name is Dr. Elena Rodriguez, and I was the lead architect of the Human Civilization Preservation Project. What you are holding is called the Resonance Key. It is the most important artifact we could leave behind. The Veiled Ones are not what they appear to be. They are parasitic beings, dependent on technology to extend their lifespans and maintain their empire. They conquered our colony because we had something they wanted, the knowledge to maintain and repair their ancient warships. Those ships were built long before the Veiled Ones ruled the galaxy. They are from a civilization that disappeared 5,000 years ago. The Resonance Key is a device that can interface with those warships. It can reactivate them, bring them back to life. For decades we tried to engineer it, to understand how to create it. And in our final days we succeeded. We hid the key here, hoping that someday when our people were desperate enough, someone would find it and use it to reclaim their freedom. The key works through harmonic resonance. It achieves a frequency that alien warships recognize and respond to. But here is the most important thing you must understand. The key is not a weapon. It is a lock. And every dormant warship in orbit around this planet is waiting for someone to turn that lock. We left schematics, blueprints, everything you need to know. The access point is on your data cable. We left it in your data cable. We believed that whoever found this place would need to understand what they were holding. Do not use this power carelessly. The Veiled Ones will resist. They will fight back with everything they have. But if you can awaken even one of the ships, if you can show your people that they are not helpless, then perhaps there is still hope. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I am sorry we could not do more. We are sorry we could not stay to fight beside you. But we did our best to leave you a weapon. Use it wisely. May humanity endure. The message ended. The holographic display faded. Marcus stood in silence, the weight of what he had just learned pressing down on him like a physical force. His hands were shaking again, but this time it was not fear. It was something else. Something that felt like hope, though he was almost afraid to acknowledge it. He carefully wrapped the resonance key in protective material and secured it in his pack. Then, moving as quickly as he dared, he made his way back out into the storm. He had found something. Something extraordinary. Something dangerous. Now came the hard part, figuring out what to do with it. Marcus did not go to his quarters that night. Instead, he went to the shipyard, a vast hangar on the outskirts of the colony where the ancient human vessels were stored. These were the ships that had brought the first colonists here 300 years ago. They were enormous, rust-covered hulks that had not flown in living memory. The Veiled Ones used them as storage facilities and nothing more. The human mechanics, including Marcus, were responsible for maintaining their structural integrity and occasionally salvaging useful components from their systems. The night guard, a thin man named Joseph, barely glanced at Marcus as he entered. Marcus had security clearance. His position as a senior mechanic granted him access to the shipyard at almost any hour. Joseph simply waved him through. The shipyard was cavernous and cold, lit by flickering emergency lights that cast long shadows across the metal floor. 3 massive ships rested in their cradles: the Endeavor, the Pathfinder, and the Genesis. The Genesis was the oldest and largest, the flagship of the original expedition. It was also the one closest to Marcus's usual work area. He made his way to the Genesis and activated the access ramp. The interior was a maze of corridors and machinery that he knew intimately from years of salvage work. He navigated by feel and memory, making his way deep into the ship's core, toward the central hub where the main control systems were located. The control room was a cathedral of silence and dust. Banks of computers, most of them long dead, lined the walls. In the center stood the command chair, now worn and cracked with age. Marcus pulled out the resonance key and stared at it for a long moment. "Here goes nothing," he whispered. He found the interface port, a large socket that had once connected to the ship's master control system. The socket was corroded and partially blocked, but with some careful work using his tools, he managed to create an opening large enough to insert the key. He took a breath and pushed the key into the port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship began to hum. It was a sound so deep and fundamental that Marcus felt it in his bones, reverberating through his entire body. Emergency lights flickered to life along the corridor walls, casting the area in a soft red glow. The computers around him began to activate, their screens illuminating with text and data. But the most dramatic change came from the ship itself. A sound like breathing echoed through the corridors. The main power generator, dormant for 3 centuries, roared to life. Lights blazed on in sequence, cascading from the core outward in a pattern that reminded Marcus of a heartbeat. The Genesis was waking up. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, though he did not remember starting to cry. He stared at the resonance key, still pulsing with light, and realized what was happening. The key was not just activating the ship. It was communicating with it, establishing a connection, downloading information directly into the ship's systems. Text scrolled across the screens in front of him, but it was in no language he recognized. Symbols and mathematical formulas filled the displays. Then, gradually, the text began to shift, transforming into English. The ship's systems were translating themselves, adjusting to human parameters, remembering how to interface with human operators. After nearly an hour, the process seemed to slow and then stop. The ship settled into a steady hum, not the frantic energy of reawakening, but the calm presence of a machine at rest, waiting for commands. Marcus carefully removed the resonance key from the port. It was warm to the touch, almost hot, and he could feel it pulsing like a second heartbeat. He had done it. He had actually done it. But he could not keep this secret. The resonance key's power was too great, too important. If the Veiled Ones discovered what he had done, they would kill him, and probably everyone in the colony. But if he did nothing, if he kept this hidden, then he was condemning his people to generations of continued slavery. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He left the Genesis and went straight to the residential sector. He had a contact, a woman named Sarah's mother, Lisa, who was part of an underground resistance network. It was small, informal, and mostly centered around sharing forbidden knowledge and keeping human culture alive. But it was something. It was hope. He told her what he had found. He told her about the key, about the warship, about the Veiled Ones being dependent on ancient technology. He showed her the resonance key, though he did not let her touch it directly. Lisa's reaction was a mixture of awe and terror. "If they find out you have this," she said quietly, "they will kill you and everyone connected to you." "I know," Marcus said. "But if we do nothing, they will eventually kill us all anyway. At least this gives us a chance." Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked carefully and methodically. He continued his normal salvage work, maintaining appearances. But in his spare time he studied the blueprints and technical data that the Resonance Key had uploaded to the Genesis. He learned about the ship's systems, how to operate them, how to repair them. He also began a secret experiment. The data from the archives indicated that there were other dormant alien warships in orbit around Kepler Station. Massive vessels, ancient and powerful, that had been abandoned or hidden centuries ago. The Veiled Ones used some of them as bases and storage facilities, but many were sealed, unmanned and waiting. If the Resonance Key could awaken the Genesis, it could awaken those ships too. And with multiple warships under human control, the odds of successful rebellion might shift from impossible to merely suicidal. Marcus began collecting people. Not all at once, but carefully, individuals he trusted, mechanics and engineers who understood the ships. He brought them into the shipyard, showed them the awakened Genesis, and let them understand the implications. The reactions varied. Some were terrified. Some were exhilarated. But all of them, to a person, understood that they were now part of something larger than themselves. They were part of a rebellion. And the rebellion was only beginning. Over the course of 3 months, Marcus and his growing network activated 5 more alien warships that had been orbiting Kepler Station. Each ship was different, each required unique adaptations and understanding. But with each successful awakening, the confidence of the Resistance grew. They now had control over 6 massive vessels. More firepower than the Veiled Ones had ever anticipated humans could possess. The challenge was keeping this secret. The Veiled Ones were not particularly attentive to the human resistance. They had grown complacent, believing their superiority to be absolute. But they were not stupid. Eventually, someone would notice that multiple ships were suddenly operational. Someone would wonder why power consumption in the shipyard had increased. Someone would ask questions. That someone turned out to be a mid-level Veiled One administrator named Cathus. He was one of the lower-ranking members of the occupation force, but he was intelligent and thorough. He ordered an inspection of the shipyard, requesting a full report on the status of all vessels and their systems. Marcus was in the command center of the Genesis when he received word of the inspection. His team scrambled to shut down the ships, to hide the evidence of their activation. But there was a problem. One of the ships, the Valiant, had already been fully activated and was in the process of running full system diagnostics. Shutting it down completely would take too long. They needed a distraction. That distraction came in the form of a catastrophic malfunction in one of the old mining facilities. An explosion ripped through the underground tunnel system, triggering an immediate emergency response. The Veiled Ones diverted their resources to investigate the explosion, delaying the inspection of the shipyard by several critical hours. By the time Cathus arrived, most of the ships appeared dormant again. But he was suspicious. He ordered the full diagnostic systems of each vessel checked, looking for signs of recent activation. Marcus stood before him, outwardly calm but inwardly terrified. Cathus was tall and imposing even by Veiled One standards, with skin that rippled between dark purple and black. His eyes were cold and analytical. "These ships show signs of power fluctuation," Cathus said, his voice like grinding metal. "Explain." "Old systems," Marcus replied steadily. "They fail unpredictably. We've been working to stabilize them as requested. The fluctuations are normal degradation." Cathus studied him for a long moment. For a terrible instant, Marcus thought the alien was going to see through the lie. But then Cathus turned away, apparently satisfied. The inspection ended without discovery. But it was a warning. They could not keep this hidden much longer. That night, Marcus called an emergency meeting of the Resistance. Every mechanic, every engineer, every person who knew about the awakened ships gathered in an old, sealed section of the shipyard. In total, there were 47 people, a small fraction of the colony's population, but people who understood the gravity of what they were attempting. "We can't continue this way," Marcus said, standing before them. "Eventually they will discover what we've done. We have 2 choices. We either destroy what we've built and give up, or we move forward. We strike." Strike with 6 ships against their entire fleet? A man named David, not the one who had died, a different David, spoke up. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged. "But we have something they don't expect. We have intelligence. We have surprise. And we have something else. We have the tactical advantage that the Veiled Ones have become complacent. They don't believe we can fight back. That belief is our greatest weapon." "How do we use it?" Lisa asked. Marcus activated a holographic display that showed the orbital positions of the Veiled One warships and their station. "We don't fight them in a direct engagement. We can't win that way. Instead, we use their own ancient technology against them. The ships we've awakened are not just dormant vessels. They are connected to a network, a command system that dates back 5,000 years. The resonance key gave us access to that network. We can use it to disable their communications, to scramble their targeting systems, to turn their own ancient technology against them. He paused, letting that sink in. We can also, he continued slowly, use it to awaken more ships. There are dozens of dormant vessels in deep storage, ships the Veiled Ones kept for contingencies but never used. If we can access those systems, we can bring them online. How long? Someone asked. 3 weeks, Marcus said. 3 weeks to awaken the full fleet, to prepare our ships for combat, to train pilots and crews. 3 weeks and we might actually have a chance. There was silence in the chamber. Then, slowly, one by one, people began to nod. They had come this far. They had risked everything. There was no turning back now. Over the next 3 weeks, the resistance moved with careful precision. They continued to work normally during the day, maintaining the appearance of compliance and servitude. But at night, they worked in secret, using the resonance key to awaken ship after ship. 11 vessels came online. Then 15. Then 20. The network that Dr. Elena Rodriguez had left behind proved invaluable. It contained not just the blueprints for the ships, but also tactical information, strategic analyses, and historical records of how these vessels had been used in ancient conflicts. Marcus devoured this information, learning how to deploy them effectively, how to coordinate their movements, how to maximize their impact against a technologically superior foe. But the Veiled Ones were not without intelligence. 2 weeks into the preparation, Cathus reported concerns to his superiors. They ordered a full lockdown of the shipyard and a complete inventory of all assets. The Veiled Ones were beginning to suspect that something was wrong. Time was running out faster than expected. On a night 17 days after the emergency meeting, as Marcus was working on the targeting systems of the Endeavor, alarms suddenly blared throughout the colony. Red emergency lights flooded the streets. The Veiled Ones had discovered the truth. They knew about the awakened ships. They knew about the resistance. It was time. Marcus sent the signal, the encrypted message that had been prepared for this moment. Across the colony, in homes and factories and hidden shelters, members of the resistance received the message. Begin. The rebellion was no longer secret. It was real and it was happening now. The Veiled Ones' response was swift and brutal. Within minutes of the alarms, security forces began sweeping through the colony, rounding up anyone suspected of being part of the resistance. Homes were searched, people were dragged from their families, and summary executions began in the streets. The aliens showed no mercy because they had expected no betrayal. The discovery that humans had dared to organize against them ignited a fury that transcended strategy. But the resistance was ready. The first act of open rebellion came not from the shipyard, but from the power station that supplied energy to the Veiled One fortress. Resistance members, armed with devices designed to overload electrical systems, struck simultaneously at 3 distribution points. The explosion was massive, visible for miles across the colony. The fortress, which had dominated the skyline for so long, suddenly plunged into darkness. In that moment of darkness, Marcus made his move. The Genesis, along with 3 other massive warships, began to rise from the shipyard. The ancient metal groaned and creaked with the effort of movement after 3 centuries of stasis. Rust fell away in great sheets. The ship's engines, powered by the resonance key's activation and fed by reserves of exotic fuel that had somehow survived intact, ignited with a roar that shook the very foundations of the colony. One of the ships, the Pathfinder, did not make it fully out of the shipyard. Its starboard engine seized and the massive vessel tilted at an angle, colliding with the structure of the hangar. The collision was catastrophic. The hangar's roof collapsed, and for a terrible moment, Marcus thought the ship would be destroyed. But the Pathfinder, for all its age and decay, was also incredibly robust. The hull held. The ship managed to right itself and, with 2 engines instead of 4, began to ascend into the atmosphere. From the fortress, Veiled One interceptor craft began to launch. They were smaller, faster, more nimble than the awakened giants. But they were also less heavily armed, and they had not expected resistance on this scale. The first few waves of interceptors were destroyed before they even understood what was happening. The ancient warship targeting systems, once fully activated, were devastatingly effective. Marcus stood in the command center of the Genesis, watching through a viewport as the colony fell away beneath them. Below, he could see fires burning, the power station, sections of the Veiled One fortress, military installations. The resistance was fighting back not just in the ships, but on the ground as well. People who had lived under oppression for their entire lives had suddenly decided that death and resistance was preferable to slow subjugation. All ships report launch completion, a crew member reported. The Genesis had a bridge crew of 35 humans, most of whom had never been in space before. But the resonance key had provided them with intuitive interfaces. The ship understood what they wanted, and systems that had not been used in 300 years responded to their commands. Set course for the fleet platform, Marcus ordered. Disengage all tether systems and prepare defensive protocols. The ship shuddered as the last of the tether mechanisms released. Suddenly the Genesis was free, floating in the black void of space. The ancient engines, built by a civilization that predated even the Veiled Ones, engaged with precision. The ship accelerated, moving toward the point in space where the Veiled One fleet was stationed. 23 human-crewed warships joined it in formation. They moved like predators, like creatures awakened after a long sleep and hungry for action. And above the colony, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. The Veiled Ones had not faced serious resistance in over 400 years. Their military had become soft, comfortable in its dominance. And now, suddenly, they were facing an enemy that they had assumed could not possibly threaten them. The first actual naval engagement began 4 hours after the initial launch. The Veiled One fleet, numbering 12 ships, had moved to intercept the awakened human vessels. The alien commander, a Veiled One named Theron who had conquered a dozen worlds, expected an easy victory. He was about to learn a lesson in humility. The human ships did not engage in conventional warfare. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, striking from unexpected angles, using the gravitational anomalies of the planet's asteroid field to mask their movements. The ancient warships had been designed for a different era of combat, and they excelled at unconventional tactics. The first Veiled One ship, a destroyer-class vessel, was caught in a crossfire from 3 human warships. Its shields, formidable against standard weapons, proved inadequate against the coordinated barrage. The destroyer's engines went offline, and it began to drift. The second engagement resulted in a Veiled One cruiser being caught by a gravitational mine, a device the ancient warships carried for disrupting enemy movements. The mine's explosion tore through the cruiser's hull, venting atmosphere and crew into space. By the end of the first day of open warfare, the Veiled One fleet had lost 3 ships. The humans had lost 2 and had 2 more severely damaged. But they had also proven something crucial: the Veiled Ones could bleed. They were not invincible. News of the battle spread through the colony like wildfire. Resistance cells, emboldened by the victories in space, began to move more openly. They attacked Veiled One installations, liberated food storage facilities, and organized evacuations of civilians from areas where the aliens were retaliating most violently. The Veiled Ones, for the first time in their occupation of Kepler Station, found themselves losing the initiative. They had expected to crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. Instead, they found themselves fighting a 2-front war, space and ground simultaneously. But they also had a significant advantage: reinforcements. A Veiled One battle fleet was approaching from the nearest occupied sector. If they could hold out for just a few more days, they would have sufficient forces to overwhelm the human resistance completely. The race was on. The humans had to achieve complete victory before the reinforcements arrived. Otherwise, the rebellion would be crushed under the weight of superior numbers. 3 days into the open rebellion, the situation on Kepler Station had descended into chaos. The Veiled Ones controlled the highest concentrations of military power, but the humans controlled the population centers. City by city, district by district, the resistance was pushing back the occupation forces. Marcus, commanding the Genesis and the remainder of the operational fleet, received a message from ground forces that changed everything. The message came from Lisa, who was now functioning as the ground command coordinator. "We've discovered the location of the central AI controlling the Veiled One defensive systems. It's in the fortress substructure, protected by heavy shields, but our scientists believe the resonance key can interface with it directly. If we can disable their central coordination system, our forces can push them completely off the planet." It was a dangerous proposition. The fortress was heavily defended. To reach the substructure, someone would have to land directly in the heart of enemy territory, fight through multiple security layers, and reach a location deep underground. The odds of success were minimal, but they were also the only real chance the rebellion had. Marcus made a decision that would later be remembered as the moment that saved humanity's future on Kepler Station. He would take the Genesis down to the surface himself. Not to fight conventionally, but to use the ship's massive firepower to create a corridor through the fortress defenses. The descent was harrowing. Anti-aircraft fire tore through the upper atmosphere as the massive ship fell toward the planet. Veiled One interceptors swarmed around it like angry wasps. But the Genesis was designed to survive far worse. Its shields held, though they took significant damage. Its guns, ancient but effective, cleared a path through the enemy formations. The ship descended toward the fortress, its trajectory calculated to position it directly above the main administrative center. As it fell, the Genesis executed a maneuver that seemed impossible for an object of its size, a radical deceleration that sent half the crew sprawling across the bridge. The impact was controlled but still catastrophic. The Genesis crashed through multiple levels of the fortress structure, its forward section driving deep into the complex. The impact killed 43 of the ship's crew and left it dangerously damaged. But it accomplished its objective. The ship came to rest directly above the central computer complex. Alarms shrieked. Emergency systems activated. But in the chaos, Marcus was able to assemble an assault team and begin their descent into the fortress interior. The team consisted of Marcus, Lisa, and 12 resistance fighters carrying weapons scavenged from Veiled One armories. They fought their way down through multiple security checkpoints. 3 team members were killed. 2 were severely wounded. But they pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that the entire rebellion depended on their success. The central AI chamber was enormous, carved from the natural rock of the planet and filled with alien technology of breathtaking sophistication. At its center, a massive construct of crystalline material, similar in composition to the resonance key but far larger, pulsed with light and energy. This was the brain of the Veiled One control system. Everything they did on this planet, from military coordination to resource management, flowed through this central intelligence. Marcus approached the main interface and carefully inserted the resonance key. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The crystalline structure of the alien AI began to resonate with the frequency of the key. Light cascaded across its surface in patterns that seemed almost beautiful. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then, text and data began to flow across the holographic displays that ringed the chamber. The resonance key was not just interfacing with the Veiled One system. It was overriding it. It was rewriting the basic command protocols, changing the fortress from an instrument of occupation to something neutral, or worse, from the Veiled One perspective, something that would no longer obey their orders. "It's working," Lisa whispered, staring at the displays as the Veiled One defense grid went offline, sector by sector. "Get me a communication channel," Marcus said urgently. "Broadcast to all our ships and ground forces. Tell them the fortress defenses are down. They have a window. They need to move now." The message went out. In orbit above Kepler Station, the remaining human warships accelerated toward the planet. On the surface, resistance forces launched their final assault on Veiled One strongholds. What had been a stalemate suddenly became a rout. The Veiled Ones, deprived of their central command system, began to falter. Their coordination broke down. Units that had been receiving orders suddenly found themselves without guidance. Some tried to hold their positions. Others attempted to retreat to their spacecraft. It did not matter. The humans, fighting with the fury of the oppressed and the momentum of unexpected victory, overwhelmed them. By the time the Veiled One reinforcements entered the Kepler system, the local forces had already been defeated. The reinforcements found not a stronghold to reinforce, but a graveyard of their own failure. Rather than throw more forces into a battle already lost, the Veiled One commander made the decision to withdraw. The occupation of Kepler Station, which had lasted 42 years, came to an end in the span of 5 days. The explosion that had destroyed the power station 17 days earlier had been controlled. The fires that raged through the Veiled One fortress for the first week after its takeover were less so. By the time the smoke cleared and the immediate crisis had passed, Kepler Station bore the scars of war. Buildings in ruins, streets filled with the debris of conflict, and thousands of graves to be dug. The rebellion had succeeded. But the cost had been devastating. Estimates suggested that 5,000 colonists had died, nearly 40% of the population. Some had been killed by Veiled One retaliation. Others had died in the fighting that followed. Still others had succumbed to starvation or disease in the chaotic weeks immediately after the rebellion's success, when the colony's infrastructure had completely broken down. The awakened warships had fared better. Of the 23 ships that had launched, 18 remained operational, though several were so badly damaged that they would need years of repair. The 12 Veiled One vessels that had been in system had been destroyed or captured. The one remaining Veiled One stronghold on the planet, a research facility in the northern polar region, had been abandoned by its inhabitants, who had fled in a smaller vessel before the human forces could reach them. The immediate days after victory were consumed with the urgent work of survival. The humans had won their freedom, but they had no idea how to run a planetary civilization without the infrastructure that the Veiled Ones had maintained. Water systems failed. Power plants shut down. Food distribution networks collapsed. It was Lisa who suggested that they turn to the ancient records left by Dr. Elena Rodriguez and the Human Civilization Preservation Project. In addition to the resonance key and the data on the warships, the archives contained extensive information on how to restore and maintain the colony's basic life support systems. Under Marcus's coordination, teams of engineers and technicians worked around the clock to restore functionality to the colony's critical systems. Power was slowly restored. Water purification plants came back online. Food storage facilities were reopened and their contents carefully rationed to the surviving population. It was during this period of reconstruction that the true magnitude of what had been accomplished began to sink in. Humanity had not just survived against overwhelming odds. They had actually defeated the oppressor. They had reclaimed their world. 3 weeks after the final battles, Marcus stood in what had been the Veiled One fortress, now being converted into the capital of a new human government. Lisa stood beside him, both of them looking out over the city of New Haven, the largest remaining human settlement, as evening fell. "We did it," Lisa said quietly. "I didn't think we would, but we did." "We won the war," Marcus replied. "The real work is just beginning. We have to rebuild everything. We have to figure out how to make a government, how to distribute resources fairly, how to ensure that what happened here doesn't happen again." "And the warships?" Lisa asked. "That's another question we have to answer," Marcus said. "We have military power beyond anything this planet has seen in centuries. The question is, what do we do with it? Do we become what we defeated? Do we use these ships to expand our own empire? Or do we do something different?" "What would you choose?" Lisa asked. Marcus considered the question for a long time. Below them, the city was slowly coming back to life. People were rebuilding, organizing, beginning to shape a new society. "I think," he said finally, "we should use them to explore. To understand what's out there. Dr. Rodriguez left us incredible technology and incredible knowledge. Maybe we should use it to discover who else is out there, to make connections with other human colonies or other species that might be more peaceful than the Veiled Ones." "That's idealistic," Lisa said. "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But we've earned the right to be idealistic. We've paid for it in blood and sacrifice." 6 months after the Veiled One withdrawal, the colony had stabilized enough to begin looking toward the future. A provisional government had been established, with representation from all the major settlements on Kepler Station. Some of the old tensions, between different groups, different resource allocations, were beginning to surface, but overall the society was holding together. Marcus had been appointed chief engineer of the colonial fleet, a position that gave him authority over the awakened warships and responsibility for maintaining their systems. It was a role he had never sought, but one he accepted because it needed to be done. The most important task he undertook was the complete restoration of the Genesis. The great ship, scarred by warfare and damaged by the controlled crash into the fortress, was painstakingly repaired. New hull sections were fabricated from salvaged materials and carefully integrated with the ancient construction. Systems were rebuilt from scratch using both human technology and the specifications provided by the archives. It took 4 months of grueling work. But when it was finished, the Genesis was more powerful than it had been in 300 years. And unlike the other warships, which remained in orbit or in the shipyard, the Genesis was being prepared for something entirely new. The provisional government, in consultation with Marcus and a council of scientists and engineers, had made a historic decision: to send an expedition out into the galaxy to seek other human colonies and to map the extent of Veiled One territory. If there were other worlds struggling under alien occupation, Kepler Station, now free and armed with ancient technology, might be able to help. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Genesis as the final preparations were completed. The ship's crew had been trained extensively: pilots, engineers, scientists, and a small military contingent. They represented the best of what Kepler Station had produced. And they were about to undertake a journey that would either change humanity's future or destroy them in the attempt. The resonance key, carefully preserved and studied, would make the journey with them. Dr. Rodriguez's archives, translated and organized into human-understandable formats, would be their guide. Sarah, Marcus's daughter, stood beside him. She was now 17 years old and had qualified as a navigator for the expedition. She had grown up under oppression, had seen her friends killed by the Veiled Ones, and had fought in the rebellion. Now she was about to explore the stars. "Are you ready?" he asked her. "Are you?" she replied. Marcus smiled. "I'm not sure anyone is ever truly ready for something like this. But that's never stopped humanity before." He activated the communication channel. "All stations, this is command. Prepare for departure. We launch in 30 minutes. Acknowledgements came back from every section of the ship. The massive vessel, which had rested dormant in the shipyard for 300 years, was about to awaken one final time. But this time it would not be wielding weapons against oppressors. It would be sailing toward discovery, toward hope, toward whatever future humanity could build among the stars. The Genesis broke orbit with grace that belied its size. Behind it, the planet Kepler station dwindled, becoming first a world, then a bright point of light, and finally indistinguishable from the countless stars that surrounded it. Marcus watched from the observatory deck, looking back at the world that had given him birth, that had cost him so much, that had ultimately given him purpose. Down there, people were rebuilding. The first democratic election since the Veiled One occupation was being planned. The colony was already looking toward expanding to other regions of the planet, establishing new settlements, growing. They had survived. More than that, they had thrived. The rebellion had taught humanity on Kepler Station something profound. They were not helpless before the universe. They were not inferior to the technologies that had dominated them. They were creative, resilient, capable of adapting and understanding systems far beyond their initial comprehension. In 300 years of oppression, they had not lost the essential spark of human ingenuity. It had been dormant, but it had never been extinguished. And that spark, like the ancient warships, could be rekindled. Sarah approached him carrying a data pad. "The navigation team wants your approval on the course," she said. "We're heading toward a region of space where Dr. Rodriguez's archives indicate there might be other human colonies." Marcus studied the proposed route. It would take them through dangerous territory, past several Veiled One strongholds, through areas of space that no human from Kepler Station had ever ventured into. The risks were enormous. "Approved," he said. "Tell them to proceed." As Sarah hurried away to relay his decision, Marcus returned his attention to the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the vast emptiness of space, there were other humans. There were other people living under the same oppression that Kepler Station had endured. And if the Genesis could reach them, if they could share the knowledge of the resonance key, if they could prove that liberation was possible, then perhaps they could ignite a spark that would spread across the entire galaxy. The ancient records left by Dr. Elena Rodriguez had contained one final message, hidden in the deepest archives, only discovered in the months following the rebellion. It had been recorded just before Rodriguez and the other planners of the Human Civilization Preservation Project had known they were dying, in their final act of resistance against the Veiled One advance. Marcus had memorized it. "We are dying. Our civilization is ending. But we do not believe that humanity itself will end. Somewhere, somehow, our descendants will endure. And if they are clever enough, if they are brave enough, they will find the tools we have left behind. They will understand that the power to shape destiny does not lie in submission to greater forces. It lies in understanding, in adaptation, in the unbreakable human will to survive and thrive. If you are hearing this, if you have found the resonance key, if you have awakened the ancient ships, then you have proven that we were right. You have proven that humanity has worth. You have proven that a single person with courage and resourcefulness can change the course of history. Now you have the opportunity to do something greater still. You can ensure that no human colony faces the darkness we faced. You can build a network of free worlds, connected by the old knowledge, united by the ancient technology, bound together by the simple truth that we are stronger together than we are apart. Go forward. Explore. Discover. But never forget that your greatest power does not come from ships or weapons. It comes from the willingness to never surrender, to always hope, to believe that even in the darkest times, change is possible. The universe is vast and ancient and often cruel. But humanity is vast and creative and enduring. We believe in you. We have left everything we could to help you succeed. The rest is up to you. The message ended as all things must. But its truth remained. The Genesis accelerated toward jump point, preparing to make the first of many transitions through hyperspace that would carry it to the edges of known space and beyond. Above the bridge, the view screen showed nothing but stars, infinite possibilities, countless worlds, an entire universe waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek it out. Marcus stood at the center of the bridge of humanity's greatest ship, surrounded by the best his people had produced, carrying the most precious technology they had ever created, and he felt something that he had almost forgotten existed. He felt hope. Not the fragile hope of captive people dreaming of freedom, Not the desperate hope of the resistance fighting against impossible odds, but the solid, grounded hope of a people who had taken control of their own destiny, who had proven their own worth, who understood that the universe, for all its dangers and challenges, was theirs to explore and shape. The resonance key, secured in its chamber deep within the ship, pulsed with gentle light, the heartbeat of technology that spanned civilizations and centuries, connecting the ancient past to the uncertain future. "All hands, this is command," Marcus announced across the ship's communication system. "We are green for jump. Prepare for transition to hyperspace in 90 seconds. This day marks the beginning of a new chapter in human history. We venture not as slaves or rebels, but as free people seeking to understand our place in the cosmos. Whatever we find out there, whatever challenges await us, we face them together as humanity united. Let us prove ourselves worthy of the legacy we carry. Jump in 3, 1, the mark." The Genesis, along with 5 support vessels, entered the transition field. For a moment, the universe seemed to twist and fold, space itself bending to accommodate the ancient technology's incomprehensible power. Then they were gone, jumped into hyperspace, leaving behind the colony world and beginning their journey across the stars. On Kepler Station, down in the city below the ruins of the Veiled One fortress, Sarah's mother Lisa stood in the public square where the colony gathered for important announcements. Around her, thousands of people were looking up at the sky where the fleet had disappeared. "They did it," someone whispered. "They did," Lisa agreed. "The first generation freed ourselves. Now maybe they can help free everyone else." In the darkness of space, in vessels that had been silent for 300 years, humanity had found its voice again. And that voice was calling to the stars. The rebellion had begun on Kepler Station, but it would not end there. It would ripple outward, spreading from world to world, colony to colony, until the entire galaxy knew that humanity was awake and that they were coming. The age of oppression was ending. The age of human destiny was just beginning. And somewhere in the vast emptiness between the stars, the ancient ships sang with the joy of purpose reclaimed, of destiny embraced, of a species that had learned the most important lesson of all, that as long as hope remains, as long as even a single person refuses to surrender, the future is never truly lost. The jump through hyperspace lasted what felt like an eternity compressed into a single breath. When the Genesis and its support fleet emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a region of space that bore no resemblance to anything in the archives Dr. Rodriguez had left behind. The system was old, impossibly old. 3 massive stars orbited a common center in a gravitational dance that should have been impossible but somehow persisted. Around the secondary star, a planetary system sprawled across space like a child's game of marbles scattered across a floor. And orbiting the tertiary star, at the edge of the system, was something that made every sensor on the Genesis light up simultaneously. A station. A massive, city-sized structure that dwarfed even the ancient warship by a factor of 10. "All ships, reduce velocity and raise shields," Marcus commanded from the bridge. "Yellow alert status. Sarah, give me a full sensor sweep of that station. I want to know everything, composition, power signatures, any signs of life." Sarah worked frantically at her navigation console, her fingers flying across holographic displays. The entire crew of the bridge held its collective breath, waiting for her analysis. This was what they had hoped for when they set out from Kepler Station. Evidence of other human installations, other colonies, other proof that they were not alone in the cosmos. "Captain," Sarah said after what felt like an eternity, "the station is definitely artificial. And the material composition, it's similar to human construction but different. More advanced. It's like human design principles built with Veiled One technology." "That's impossible," one of the senior engineers muttered. "Run the analysis again," Marcus said. "And expand the sensor sweep. Look for any signs of power generation, life support, anything that might indicate current habitation." The minutes stretched out as the sensors did their work. The Genesis maintained its position 3 million kilometers from the station, a safe distance that would allow them to maneuver quickly if the structure proved hostile. Around them, the 5 support vessels maintained formation, their weapon systems on standby. Then Sarah's console emitted a sound that froze everyone in place. An alert. A response. "We're receiving a transmission," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's in human language. It's a hailing frequency. They're welcoming us. They're calling themselves Salvation Station, and they're asking us to identify ourselves." The bridge erupted into a controlled chaos of excitement and caution. Marcus raised his hand for silence. "This could be a trap," he said carefully. The veiled ones might be using human language as a lure. Sarah, analyze the transmission. See if you can determine its origin, how old it is, whether it's an automated loop or an active communication. Sarah's analysis took another 10 minutes. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Captain, the transmission is old, incredibly old. The encoding and encryption methods predate the current Veiled One technology by at least 500 years. But it's not a loop. There's variation in the message. It's responding to our approach. And sir, the message includes technical specifications. It's like they're sending us an invitation. A way to dock safely with their station. Marcus stood, looking out at the massive structure hanging in space before them. It represented everything they had hoped to find: proof of human survival, proof of human achievement, proof that somewhere in the galaxy humanity had not only survived but had built something extraordinary. Reply to their hailing frequency, he said. Identify ourselves as survivors from the Kepler Station colony. Tell them we're peaceful and we're seeking information about other human settlements. And prepare a shuttle. I'm going down to that station personally. The transmission went out. The response came back within minutes, along with updated docking coordinates and what appeared to be a direct invitation for the station commander to come aboard. Lisa, who had joined the expedition as the political representative from the provisional government, approached Marcus as he prepared to board the shuttle. This is dangerous, she said bluntly. You're the only person who truly understands the resonance key. If something happens to you down there, then you'll figure it out without me, Marcus replied, though not unkindly. You've already proven that humanity doesn't need one person to succeed. We need each other. But this is something I need to see for myself. Something I need to understand. The shuttle descended through the station's outer atmosphere, if it could be called that, and approached one of the massive docking bays. The structure was even more impressive up close. The metal of its hull showed signs of age, but it had been maintained with care. Markings were visible on the surface, symbols that Marcus recognized from Dr. Rodriguez's archives as early human designations. This station had been built by humans. Centuries ago, perhaps longer. The docking procedure was smooth and automated. The shuttle settled into a berth, and a seal engaged with a hiss of pressure equalization. Marcus checked his suit one final time and, accompanied by 2 security personnel, made his way through the airlock into Salvation Station. What he found on the other side defied belief. The interior of the station was enormous, a vast atrium that rose upward for what must have been hundreds of meters. And it was alive with people. Humans. Thousands of them, walking through corridors, working at various stations, going about their lives as though they lived in a city on solid ground rather than a vast artificial structure hanging in the void of space. Welcome, Captain Marcus Chin, a voice said, and a figure stepped forward from the crowd. She was an older woman, perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to contain centuries of knowledge. She wore a uniform of a design Marcus did not recognize, but it clearly marked her as someone of authority. I am Commander Helena Vasquez, she said, extending her hand. Welcome to Salvation Station. Welcome to the true heart of humanity's future. Marcus shook her hand, barely able to form words. There are thousands of people here. 12,734 to be precise, Commander Vasquez said with a slight smile. And we are just one station. There are others, scattered across the galaxy, hidden from the Veiled Ones for centuries. But your arrival suggests that the time for hiding is finally over. She gestured for him to follow, and Marcus found himself walking through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past laboratories where humans were working with technology that made the warship system seem primitive by comparison, past agricultural centers that produced food in quantities that would feed colonies many times the size of Kepler Station's population. How is this possible? Marcus asked. The Veiled Ones have been looking for human colonies for centuries. How have you hidden from them? The same way you hid the reactivated warships, Vasquez replied. Through the application of ancient technology, through understanding systems that the Veiled Ones had forgotten, and through patience. When the last remnants of human civilization fell before the Veiled One advance, some of us did not surrender. We built stations like this in the deep black, in regions of space so remote that the Veiled Ones never bothered to search. We waited. We preserved knowledge. We built toward a future when humanity might be ready to reclaim its place. She led him into a vast chamber that took his breath away. The walls were covered with data screens, displaying astronomical charts, technological specifications, and information that seemed to encompass the entire breadth of human knowledge and achievement. This is the archive chamber, Vasquez explained. Every scrap of human knowledge that we could preserve, every scientific advancement, every historical record, it's all here. And more importantly, it's all being studied, improved upon, adapted. Humanity did not simply hide here. We evolved. The resonance key, Marcus said slowly. You know about it. We more than know about it, Vasquez replied. We helped design it. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was one of our greatest researchers. She left Salvation Station to ensure that other human colonies would have a chance at freedom. The key was her final masterpiece, a device that could interface with any sufficiently advanced technology and allow humans to understand and command it. She walked to a nearby console and activated a holographic display. Images flooded the air, ancient human civilizations, spacefaring cultures that had achieved a level of technological sophistication that made modern warfare look like children's games. 10,000 years ago, Vasquez continued, humanity was not scattered and enslaved. We were united, powerful, and we understood the cosmos far better than we do now. We built the warships that now serve you. We established colonies across dozens of star systems. We were on the verge of becoming something greater than anything the galaxy had ever seen. What happened? Marcus asked. The Veiled Ones happened, Vasquez said bitterly. They came from beyond the known galaxy, and they were more ruthless and more advanced than anything we could resist. We were not enslaved gradually, we were conquered completely in the span of a few decades. Most of our civilization was destroyed. The survivors scattered, hiding, forgetting, regressing into the barbarism that you experienced on Kepler Station. She turned to face Marcus directly. But some of us remembered. Some of us knew that humanity was capable of more. And we dedicated ourselves to preserving that knowledge, to waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to rise again. Your rebellion on Kepler Station, it signals that the moment has come. Marcus felt the weight of what Vasquez was telling him settling across his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. You want us to lead a galactic rebellion, he said. It was not a question. I want humanity to reclaim what was taken from us, Vasquez replied. And yes, that requires a rebellion. But more than that, it requires unity. It requires sharing knowledge. It requires an understanding that no single colony can survive alone, but together, with pooled resources and shared technology, we can build something that the Veiled Ones cannot defeat. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a map of the galaxy, with Salvation Station and other points marked in blue. Veiled One territories were marked in red, and they dominated most of the map. But the blue points, the human stations, formed a pattern, a network that connected them all. There are 43 human settlements in this region of the galaxy alone, Vasquez continued. Some are large like Salvation Station. Others are small, barely more than research outposts or mining colonies. But all of them are human, and all of them are suffering under Veiled One oppression or in constant fear of discovery. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. Your leadership. Your experience with the resonance key. And most importantly, your proof that rebellion is possible. You took one awakened warship and turned it into an army. You showed your people that the Veiled Ones could be defeated. If you can do that for other colonies, if you can coordinate a simultaneous uprising across dozens of worlds. She paused, and for the first time, a genuine smile appeared on her weathered face. If you can do that, then we might actually have a chance at genuine freedom. Not just for one colony but for all of humanity. Marcus stood in silence, trying to process the enormity of what he was being asked to do. He had come seeking other human colonies. He had found something far greater. He had found the infrastructure for a galactic revolution. Show me everything, he said finally. Show me the other stations, the other colonies, the plans that are already in place. And show me the Veiled One military positions, their strongholds, their weaknesses. If we're going to do this, we're going to need perfect intelligence and perfect coordination. Vasquez's smile widened. I was hoping you would say that. Come. There is much to see, much to learn, and much to plan. The age of human subjugation is ending. But only if we're willing to fight for it. She led him deeper into Salvation Station, toward rooms filled with strategic planners and military tacticians who had been waiting for this moment for decades, perhaps centuries. As they walked, Marcus realized that his simple act of rebellion on Kepler Station had rippled across the galaxy in ways he could never have anticipated. The resonance key had been more than just a tool for awakening ancient warships. It had been a signal, a beacon, a sign that humanity was ready to rise again. And now, standing in the heart of Salvation Station, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge and power of humanity's greatest remaining achievement, Marcus understood his true purpose. He was not just a mechanic who had accidentally stumbled upon world-changing technology. He was a catalyst, a symbol. The first warrior in what would become humanity's greatest war. A war for survival, for freedom, for the right to exist as a free species in a galaxy dominated by those who would enslave them. The rebellion on Kepler Station had been just the beginning. The true war was only now beginning to take shape, and it would determine the fate of humanity itself. The weeks that followed Marcus's arrival at Salvation Station were the most intense of his life. He spent 18-hour days in briefing rooms and strategic planning sessions, learning about the other human colonies and the complex web of resistance that had been quietly growing across decades of apparent subjugation. The network was more extensive than anything Marcus had imagined. There were 43 human settlements that Salvation Station had direct contact with, but Vasquez believed there might be hundreds more, isolated colonies that had managed to survive in secret, unknown even to the larger network. Each colony had its own story of resistance and struggle. Some, like Kepler Station, had lived under direct Veiled One occupation. Others had managed to avoid capture by hiding in remote regions of space or by developing sophisticated camouflage and cloaking technologies that made them invisible to alien sensors. There was Refuge 3, a mining colony built into the core of a massive asteroid, where humans had spent 2 centuries secretly extracting rare minerals and selling them to independent traders. There was New Horizon, an agricultural colony that had managed to maintain a sustainable ecosystem and population by carefully controlled breeding and resource management. There was the Research Collective, a fleet of mobile stations that had been traveling through space for over a century, constantly moving to avoid detection while accumulating scientific knowledge. And there were others, some thriving, some barely surviving, all of them human, all of them waiting for the moment when they could stop hiding and start fighting. Commander Vasquez showed Marcus the strategic plans that had been in development for decades. Plans for simultaneous uprisings across multiple worlds. Plans for disrupting Veiled One supply lines and communication networks. Plans for the coordinated deployment of awakened warships against the occupation forces. The timing is crucial, Vasquez explained during one particularly intensive planning session. We cannot afford a scattered, uncoordinated rebellion. The Veiled Ones have superior numbers and superior firepower. Our only advantage is coordination and the element of surprise. We strike simultaneously across the entire region, we overwhelm their local forces before they can call for reinforcements, and we create a chain reaction that spreads outward. How long until we're ready? Marcus asked. 3 months, Vasquez said. Maybe 4. We need time to distribute the resonance key technology to the other colonies, to train their personnel on the awakened warship systems, to coordinate timing and logistics. It is ambitious, but it is achievable. Marcus spent hours studying the technical specifications of the Veiled One military infrastructure. He learned about their command structure, their communication systems, their supply chains. He discovered that, much like the ancient warships that humanity now controlled, the Veiled One technology was dependent on certain key systems. Take out those systems, and the entire structure of their occupation would crumble. One afternoon, while Marcus was studying maps of Veiled One territory, Sarah found him in the strategy chamber. She had remained on the Genesis, but Vasquez had brought her down to Salvation Station when she learned that Sarah was Marcus's daughter and that she had shown exceptional aptitude for navigation and tactical planning. "Dad, look at this," she said, pointing to a particular sector of the map. "The Veiled One central command post for this region is here, at the Fortress of Eternal Watch, which orbits the primary star of the Varos system. But look at the supply lines. They're all funneling through this choke point." Marcus studied the map closely. Sarah was right. There was a narrow region of space, a corridor formed by gravitational anomalies and nebulae, through which almost all of the Veiled One supplies and reinforcements had to pass. "If we could block this corridor," Sarah continued, her excitement building, "if we could place a fleet of awakened warships in the right positions, we could cut off the central command from their reinforcements. They would be isolated." "Brilliant," Marcus said, pulling his daughter close. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need. You're not just following plans, you're improving them." Sarah's face flushed with pride, and in that moment, Marcus realized something profound. His daughter represented the future of humanity. She had grown up in oppression but had never accepted it as inevitable. She had fought for freedom, and now she was helping to shape the strategy that would free not just one colony, but potentially all of humanity. The next day, Marcus presented Sarah's strategic insight to the full Command Council of Salvation Station. The proposal was received with enthusiasm and quickly incorporated into the master plan. The Varos corridor would become a key strategic position in the rebellion. But there were also challenges and disagreements. Not everyone on Salvation Station agreed that open rebellion was the right path. Some of the older commanders who had lived through the initial Veiled One conquest and had seen the devastation of open warfare, argued for a more cautious approach. We should focus on consolidating our colonies, argued Commander Torres, an older military tactician with white hair and scarred features. Build our strength quietly over decades if necessary. We have the luxury of time. The Veiled Ones are complacent. Why risk everything on a gambit that could fail? Because every day we wait is another day that humans suffer under oppression, Marcus countered. Because we have the knowledge and the technology to win. And because if we don't act now when we have momentum and unity, we may never have another chance. The Veiled Ones will eventually discover what we're building. And when they do, they will move to destroy us if we've made ourselves a threat, or ignore us if we've remained hidden and harmless. The debate raged for hours with arguments and counterarguments flowing back and forth. But in the end, Vasquez made the decision. They would move forward with the rebellion. They would coordinate with the other human colonies. They would strike. One by one, the colonies began to respond to Salvation Station's communications. Some agreed immediately. Others needed convincing. But gradually a consensus emerged. Humanity was ready to fight for its freedom. In the colony on Refuge 3, miners began preparing explosive devices that could be used to sabotage Veiled One mining operations. In New Horizon, agricultural specialists began calculating what resources would be needed to sustain a population during wartime. In the Research Collective, scientists began refining defensive technologies and developing new weapons systems based on the ancient human knowledge preserved in Salvation Station's archives. And throughout all of this, the resonance key was carefully copied, or rather, its data patterns were extracted and replicated across multiple devices. Humanity now possessed not one ancient artifact capable of awakening dormant warships, but dozens. Each colony received a copy, along with detailed instructions on how to use it. 6 weeks after Marcus's arrival at Salvation Station, he returned to the Genesis with Lisa and Sarah to brief the crew on what they had discovered and what was about to happen. The reactions ranged from amazement to fear to determination. That night, as the fleet hung in orbit around Salvation Station, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Genesis, looking down at the massive structure below. Somewhere in there, Commander Vasquez was making final preparations for the largest coordinated military action in human history. Somewhere else in the galaxy, colony after colony was preparing to rise up, to fight for freedom, to prove that they were more than just slaves of the Veiled Ones. Sarah stood beside him as she so often did these days. "Do you think we can win?" she asked quietly. "I think we have to try," Marcus replied. "But yes, I think we can win. The Veiled Ones conquered us because we were divided, unprepared, and terrified. We're none of those things now. We're united, we're preparing, and we're done being terrified." "What happens after?" Sarah asked. "After we win? What kind of civilization do we build?" Marcus considered the question. It was a good one, perhaps the most important one. They had spent so much time and energy on the rebellion that they had not fully considered what would come next. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I know who will help us figure it out. All of humanity. Not just Kepler Station or Salvation Station, but all the colonies working together. All the different perspectives and ideas and dreams coming together to create something new." "That sounds complicated," Sarah observed. "It will be," Marcus agreed. "But it's also the most important thing we'll ever do. Winning the war is the easy part. Building a truly free human civilization, that's the real challenge. And it's one we'll face together." As the Genesis orbited Salvation Station, the final preparations for rebellion continued. Across the galaxy, humans who had lived for generations in fear of the Veiled Ones were beginning to understand that fear could be overcome. That resistance was possible. That freedom was within reach. The age of oppression was truly ending. And the age of human destiny was about to begin in earnest. The rebellion on Kepler Station had been the spark. Salvation Station and the network of human colonies were the kindling. And now, the entire galaxy was about to catch fire with the flames of human liberation. The end.